I didn't see that coming, right? I didn't think Putin would invade,
Yeah.
right? Like I thought that was just a threat. I would have thought maybe he would have, the same way that there was a referendum in Crimea, maybe there would be something like that in the Donbass area. And so when that happens, obviously then he's going to move in the troops to secure that as a part of Russia, just like with Crimea.
Yeah.
Right? But nah, he went full on. But man, I mean, if you look at the map of NATO since the 90s, the whole point of NATO was to oppose Russia in the first place. And NATO has kept on adding countries further and further closer to the border of Russia. Right? So obviously Russia is scared. This is just some background. That this anti-Russia military group is coming to my doorstep, right? So when Ukraine was, they weren't talking about adding Ukraine to NATO, but making it a NATO partner and increasing relations with them. Then Russia's like, okay, nah. And then the U.S. is sending billions of dollars of weapons to Ukraine for the past several years. So, I mean, all that being said, I wish that Putin had found a different way to, secure this. But, geez, man. This is something that's been instigated for decades.
Exactly. I think and I fell into a little bit in the there are bits and there are moments where you really just hyper focus on the here and now. And it's and I mean I understand the sentiment right now. It's hey, we need to condemn this and that, and we need to do this. But I mean, not that I understand people saying we need to sanction, a country, or we need to intervene militarily or send weapons. Send weapons to who, first and foremost? We saw in Syria sending weapons to who, right?
People who ended up joining ISIS.
Yeah. Or in Libya ended up supporting who at the end, people who again the most extreme elements of society ended up getting these weapons that you're sending over there, right? That we are gonna send over there. Especially it's kind of weird that in this country right now, what is it? The total package that they announced was $600 million. That is
for what?
For Ukraine?
For Ukraine. Okay.
That's half the student. I mean, that's point.
Sending them arms?
Yes. So it's lethal aid.
What is this?
$350 million in lethal aid. And
some congressional thing that just happened?
I think Biden announced it.
Okay.
What was it? Total. I think total is about $600 million, and it's weird that we were able to come up with that within a few days. $600 million, right? When we are in dire straits, supposedly, allegedly, right? And I'm only going off of the rhetoric because I think we have a lot of money, and you can probably help out a lot of people around the world with that, right? Not that, but we're not spending it on that. We're gonna be sending, what is it, $600 million to Ukraine, and I just want to know what the breakdown of that is. I believe $350 million is straight up. 350 million of that is straight up military aid.
Yeah, Reuters is saying that.
Yeah, and then I'm trying to find out the other 250 million. Is that just direct? What is that for? The whole package, right? But they announced that within a couple of days. It's going to this government that is propped up. It's undemocratic. That I think that. Going back to the here and now thing I was trying to illustrate, this being cast as the start of a war or a land, you could say this is the start of a land invasion, but regardless of who you hold responsible for this happening, it started at least a decade ago, right? You could say this. You would say at least with the invasion of Crimea, or the removal of the year before of the president, right, by force. You're
talking 2014?
I think 2014 is the invasion of Crimea allegedly to protect the Russian population in that area.
Yeah.
Right. But obviously there's natural gas. There's a lot of natural gas there, and it's
they get the access to the Black Sea, right? So from a naval point of view, if they can have a fleet in the Black Sea, that underside of Russia, that's kind of exposed, they have like a defense there.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is Turkey is on the other side, right? And Turkey is like vying for naval influence too, right? On the Mediterranean side, and obviously they want security on the Black Sea side. And recently I read, I think it was earlier today, that Erdogan, or no, it might have been yesterday, that Erdogan declared that he is closing some pathway to Russian Navy vessels.
Oh, it's I'm guessing it'll be the strait that separates
the Black Sea and the Mediterranean.
Yeah, separates Istanbul from the rest of Asia.
Yeah.
Oh, what is the strait? I'm forgetting the name completely. But it's kind of a throwback to the Crimean War, if I'm remembering the war correctly. But I think there's a war between Turkey and Russia and I think Britain and France over Russian expansion. Yeah.
Way back, yeah.
Yeah, probably mid 1800s or so, give or take.
Yeah.
And they were trying to halt Russian expansion, which they successfully did.
Yeah.
So seems like a throwback almost. What is the strait separating Bosphorus?
The Bosphorus, okay.
Is that what he's closed down?
I don't remember if that's what it said, but that would make sense. Actually, yeah, because Syria has a Russian naval base as well. So they may be trying to cut off the Navy presence in Syria from being able to go through the Black Sea to Ukraine. That's just a guess. I don't know. It would make sense from a functional point of view.
Yeah, and it makes sense that all these different stakeholders in the region are very are ready to act, right? Like Israel started bombing in Syria. I know they've been doing it on and off.
I mean,
that's out to me, but,
every week or two.
I think at this point you can do it more belligerently without having to you can really expand your operations in that area, knowing that Russian forces are preoccupied doing what they gotta do.
Yeah.
Good or bad, wherever they're doing it. Because they've been doing stuff. Before Eastern Europe. I think in the mid 2000s they're doing it in Central Asia.
Yeah.
Georgia, Chechnya, these things they've been trying to consolidate whatever they can from the former USSR. But this natural gas in Crimea, I think that this kind of has really they needed to protect that. That's why they kind of intervened in 2014 more so than. I don't know if that is really accurate though. More so than the people, because there is definitely far right elements, nationalistic elements that do not view those Russian Slavic descended people as that's the same as the more European Western Ukrainians. So.
And those are like the Ukrainian ultranationalists. There was like a neo-Nazi group in that, and then there was also we talked about pogroms against Poles after Poland had taken over part of Ukraine or all of Ukraine or whatever.
Yeah, it does.
Bandera was the guy's name, I think.
Yeah, I think the post or during World War II, right? I think he's like a World War II post during World War II. He's a figure that emerges that the Poles had committed a lot of atrocities against the Ukrainians during the Polish-Ukrainian War.
Okay.
And they took over a lot of, I guess, what is it, Western Ukraine.
All right.
So now they obviously they have a whole history of this whole region has a whole history that goes back to the 6th century, the 5th century almost, of people who had lived there, had not settled the land, right there, because it's not very arable land. It's you're on the steppes. Is that in the Eurasian steppes, or I guess it's very conducive to people who are nomadic,
Right.
Right. There's no way to really just settle down and like build up things, especially at that time.
At that time, yeah, of course.
Like, I mean, what was it about? I'm talking about probably about like 500, 600s, give or take. Probably before that, but I mean, like there's no recorded history of like there's so many different groups, and it was a very like multi-ethnic area, right? Like I think the term Slavic encompasses so many different people who have inhabited, because they're moving around so much. There's like a bunch of different people at different times that you could consider Slavs.
Yeah, and there are different like branches of that.
But this specific, the Western Ukrainians, I think over time have developed a more European identity in comparison to the Eastern Europeans who have that Eastern. The
Eastern Ukrainians, well, so a lot of them are Russian ethnically.
Yeah, I mean, I read up on I think like statistics. I mean, it depends on what you consider Ukraine at the present moment.
Yeah.
But I think like give or take, what it was about 20 to 30% of people are like Russian. At least speak Russian ethnically, about 20%. But there's a lot of overlap in these like numbers, because there's people on the other side of the border that are Ukrainian, or what you would consider Ukrainian.
Sure, that's true. But I don't know if it's like to the same extent.
What is that to the same extent?
If like the Ukrainians in Russia, are you saying that like there are Ukrainians in Russia as well? Yeah. But I don't know. I think because that area itself is like an area that where the, I guess, nationality or ethnicity or whatever transitions, I feel like Ukrainians in Russia probably moved to Russia at a certain point. Whereas like Crimea has, but see, here's the thing, like, the Crimean Tatars were if I'm not mistaken, the original inhabitants of Crimea, like way, way back. I don't know how many hundreds of years ago, Russians settled there, right? And now the Crimean
settled, literally settled, like Israel settled, like exactly the same way. I think the 1930s or so, probably 40s. That's when I think that whole population gets exported.
Okay.
Out of that area. But You were saying what about them though?
What was I saying about them? No, it was just interesting that it was interesting that it shows like all the shifting around that's happened, and that's crazy.
Oh yeah, I mean I think the history of the whole area is very interesting from an anthropological standpoint. First and foremost,
I mean, right? But Ukrainians and Russians are both Slavs.
Yeah,
they're both Slavic people. Belarusians as well. Czechs, Poles.
So they're different types of different. There are different types of like
I'm reading Slavs. Wikipedia right now, right? There's like East Slavs, West Slavs, South Slavs, and under East are Belarusians, Russians, Ukrainians.
The South Slavs probably are like the Baltic states, the East.
Bosniaks, Bulgarians, Croats, Macedonians, Montenegrins, Serbs, and Slovenes. So like Yugoslavia area, former Yugoslavia.
Would that okay? And
West is Czechs, Kashubs, Poles, Slovaks, and Sorbs.
Okay, so that makes sense. Like,
it makes sense.
It makes sense why those Western Slavs would have that more of a Western, more European identity in comparison to like an Eastern Slav, a descendant. Not that these things, these labels hold much value for the ordinary person, or even like in any analysis that is supposed to inform any decisions to be made on this. But I think these origins, or I think these like different groups, that since it's such a nomadic since it's such an area that's inhabited by people who are constantly moving around and just trying to find ways of sustenance, it's hard to term them anything except for what area they inhabited at the end, and what resources those areas were able to provide. Like what strategic, like, value they were.
Yeah.
So the Baltic states, they're like, the gateway into the Baltic Sea, for Europe in a sense. Same with Crimea for both, Russia and Ukraine at the moment. And historically, people who were like settled there, right, regardless of like which tribe or whatnot, they ended up having to move to a different spot, either because of this nomadic lifestyle originally, but as people became more used to like settling down in those areas, it became more to kind of take control of the resources and or like whatever resources or the whatever geostrategic
benefits are that, in that location.
That location provided.
Yeah, definitely.
But honestly, even in the history of Slavs, though, it is like and is a bit of a tangent. The history of Slavs themselves, it's weird to where they come from, because you do have for me it seemed like Slavic people came from like Central Asia, or like and they moved into these like areas and just like lived that lifestyle until they eventually I think they started appearing in history books for like Rome, in Roman history books much like later, right? Much later after they had settled the area. But there's disagreement if they are actually Nordic descent.
Okay.
Or if they are.
So they would have come south from like Scandinavia. Sweden, Norway, Finland, down.
Yes, they would they would come down south, using those different types of different rivers, because they were so like like they were just like naval people, I guess. Well, I don't know the term, like maritime people, seafaring.
Yeah,
they were a seafaring society.
Yeah, it was literally.
There were seamen, all of them. but
man.
Yeah, so either for me it seemed obvious that Russian people or like they're Slavs.
Yeah.
Because it just seems much more like when you hear the language, it just seems the overlap is too much, right? For it not to be more of like a dialect of, like, what would be the proper term for this? It would be more Slavic than based out of a Germanic language, like or a Nordic. Based around Nordic culture.
Yeah.
But I think the the consensus has been that they are Nordic peoples.
Okay. Interesting. Migration.
I mean, I don't know. It's I think a lot of that might be revisionism on the
it could be
because what it's interesting because at some point when this area is being is actually like comes together, they have a Nordic ruler, right? And when they overthrow him, they actually ended up like inviting him back at some point, and it I don't know. It's just it seems kind of romanticized in a weird way. It's interesting how these things play out over time and repeat, right, for the same exact reason.
But at this point, it's like you have states, and clearly on the eastern side, there's that nationalistic aspect. Whereas before, I mean, when it was a nomadic thing, there was tribalism. And I guess nationalism is like now the iteration of tribalism with nation states. Sort of.
Yeah, I think the emergence of nation states in Europe especially like after the breakup of the Soviet Union, based around ethnic lines. That it shows you how dangerous this. I think this crossroads that we find ourselves at, of our understanding of government, of politic, and how human beings are to be like administered, right, on a mass scale.
Yeah.
We are at a point where I think we see the nation state in its life cycle. It's this era of nation states. It's a powder keg, and I use that both, it's like a double entendre because of this. It's a powder keg of sorts, and this will you see it around the world, right? This is happening in South Asia. You can say it's been happening in South Asia, right? And it emerges around the same, in a post colonial world, like this. I mean, whatever you wanna, in a post. In whatever we would, if in a way, it's a post-colonial world now. Okay, let's say.
Yeah.
In a post-colonial world, the
right now,
breakup of
neocolonialism, I guess, is.
Yeah, you're right.
But
in a neocolonial world, the breakup of former colonies into nation states based around ethnicity, you see the detriments of that right now in Eastern Europe, in South Asia. Anywhere there's even a little heterogeneous element to society, right? Anywhere there's not a monolithic society, you see this imposition of ethnic majorities on minorities or whatever. I mean, whatever different. It could be based around language, history, ethnicity, whatnot, and resources are usually to play around it. And that's not an accident, because these things correlate over time. These things, there's correlation and causation over time of where people live and the customs they develop and the resources that they are, I guess, in possession of.
Yeah.
And what neighbors want them and what language they speak and what rivalries form over time.
Right.
So this specifically right now in Ukraine, I think is just honestly, it's a petri dish. It's if you wanted to test this out in a lab, of the breakup of the USSR and these Eastern European states having to, or I mean, it just by whatever for whatever reason having turned into these ethno nation states, right, where
what were like, so I've heard a case for the collapse of the Soviet Union being like one of the biggest disasters. In what ways was it disastrous for us now? I mean, the one thing is, a multipolar world became a unipolar world. It allowed for the United States to be a global hegemon and assert its dominance over majority of the world. But like, what are some of like the macro and micro things that resulted from that? And obviously, a lot of those things are what led up to this invasion that happened now.
I mean, honestly, like, one of the biggest tragedies I think that has befallen the world might be, and that's not because of any affinity. I'm not personally Slavic or anything. I don't have nothing to do with that. I'm not from but especially it's so hard to wrap your mind around the fact that there's like a state run, like everything is state run, everything is state owned.
Yeah.
Right. So your local factory, the iron that it produces, who exports it, where it's shipped, who the manager reports to, could be a member of the party directly, right? And all these things, one day when the state ceases to exist completely somehow. Now, again, it's just so baffling to it's so hard to imagine that one day when you wake up and the manager of your factory, just because he's a manager, him and like four of his boys are like, yeah, we own this factory now, everything's gonna run the same way, but instead of paying it to the government, I'm gonna keep
You
these
pay
profits.
us, yeah.
And this
Back to
road that
capitalism.
I mean, it could be this road that everyone used to pay a toll on or didn't pay a toll on. Now you pay a toll on it, and who is the governing authority? It's me with my gun, or me.
Got you.
Yeah,
Got
and
you.
it's because I held the stick before for someone else, and now that guy's not. There's no one else.
There's no one over me now.
Yeah,
I'm like,
I'm the highest government official, and I'm the sheriff here. Basically,
exactly.
to put it into like
Okay. Yeah.
I think and not to make it you can hear around the world jokes, about prostitutes and drugs and abuse in Eastern European nations, right?
Right.
Like I think there's a movie about it. I don't know if it's Taken
Yeah,
one
that
or
was a
two
really
or
good
three.
movie.
And there's always like in like these like pop culture. There's always like I remember Family Guy. There's this like Eastern European gymnast coach. And he's like basically sexually abusing one of the contestants. Whatever that he's coaching, and that is like so widespread as a joke because there's
the stereotypes come from that.
The stereotypes come from the stereotypes, and the stereotypes are based in reality, which is after the fall of the USSR.
Economic situation was so desperate because of this like new classism that emerged. So the people at the lower, the people who were being exploited had to turn to either that or like the destruction was such that like people just lost their jobs altogether.
People, I mean, if you imagine like people, the hundreds of thousands, millions of people who worked in the military. Well, now there is no military. This is like you go home, and how you get home. I mean, when everything is state run and state owned, and one day the state decides to cease to exist, which is kind of like I think they got to like. I mean, I don't want to harken back too much to my memory in my memory about how the process of dissolution of the USSR actually took place, because there's like a series of meetings that they do, and like Gorbachev's ass is like weird mark on the head and everything, but
that was bad. But the result of that is that now you have, again, like we said, a world with one dominant power exercises hegemony over the world, and then you have these states now like Russia or whatever that are Russia or China, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, whatever have you, that are in resistance to that. So you see like this expansion of NATO ultimately being like a checkpoint, not a checkpoint, a checkmate geopolitically for Russia in Europe. And then the Syria thing, Russia and the US are kind of indirectly vying for influence there. So that geostrategic aspect, right, that you talked about, you can see it at play. And that's kind of what's going on there. Obviously, there's like the ethnic aspect of it as well, that affinity. And then there's the gas pipeline.
That is the part.
Nord Stream.
Nord Stream 2. So
what's interesting is I saw a clip of Trump talking to I think some oil execs, or I don't know what it was, and he was talking about China is or not China, sorry, Russia is like on top of this, and he was kind of trying to get those guys to, he's kind of speaking to him, and it's crazy. He had something where he was like the US and Russia should not be beefing. They should like have a partnership, and that would be very powerful. So I mean, you can see how him and his closeness to like the oil and gas oligarchs here, Rex Tillerson was his the former Exxon exec.
Was he energy secretary
or Chevron?
Or what was he? What was Rex Tillerson?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I forgot. He was secretary of. Was he in the State Department or some point? Yeah, he was. He was a Secretary of State.
Oh wow! See, there you go. It's interesting, a kind of a different approach.
Chairman and CEO of Exxon.
There you go.
Until right before he became the secretary, but
like Lloyd Austin on the Raytheon board before becoming Biden's Secretary of Defense.
Yeah, But
these weapon manufacturers.
Interesting. I don't know what to make of it either way. But while like he was so obviously when he was in his position as Secretary of State, he was trying to like somehow, for whether consciously or unconsciously, but definitely consciously, further the interests of ExxonMobil.
Yeah.
Or at least that was high on his priority list.
Right.
And one of the things that he pushed was no sanctions on Russia.
Right.
Right. And I did not know what the in would be for ExxonMobil on no sanctions on Russia, because you would think the export of natural gas and oil from Russia
would be competition.
Yeah, even though I don't know how much the oil would be anymore, because the cost of producing oil in Russia, I think it was so high that after the fall of the the barrel in 2015,
yeah,
the fall of the barrel from like $120 or something at some point to $24, $25 a barrel. And at that point, people in like the Russian market told the Russian producers the cost of production was too high. It was in the hundreds or so, and the cost of production in Venezuela also was like $70 or so. So they also were not, their oil was no good in the market. The Saudis could produce it well, and then the fracking industry obviously had to like catch on to this real quick and find a way. But it was also kind of expensive for them at that moment, because 2014, 2015, it was just entering into like the zeitgeist. Hey, this is what's fracking. I had not heard of the term as much. Like now, everyone knows what fracking is.
Right. The U.S. increased its oil production with that, or gas. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know, man. A lot of factors at play, and we'll see how this unfolds over the next several days.